Ivor, you should have presenters' rights.
Fantastic. Yes, I do. Good, 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 good. How many people are you expecting, Sharon?
18.
Whoa. All right. That's a big number. Right. Is it visible, Sharon?
Not yet on my side. It does take a little while to load. There we go. Something's happening, Ivor. And 5, 4, 3, 2, got it.
Excellent. Right. Is that making sense?
It's gone away again.
Is there nothing on the screen?
No, not now. I had your slides on the screen, and then you were doing something and it went away. Loading. Got it?
Excellent, excellent, excellent. It's 9:25. Are we going to start at 9:30?
Yes, please. 5 minutes and then we start.
Okie dokie.
There's 2 other people asking for the link. I'm just quickly going to set them up on that one and we'll be ready.
Fantastic, fantastic. I'm just muting my mic.
Okay, good morning all. While I have a minute or two, I will take the stage. For those who remember or who attended the launch of the awards, the theme this year is Star Wars, and I'm all hard at work entering your various categories because I must say the entries are going crazy and it's lovely to see. However, with Star Wars, we went down the hero's journey at the launch, but for today I have to tell you that we are all Padawans. Yes, Padawans. And as we sit here and get our one-to-one instruction in ways of the Jedi, we will look to our Jedi Master, Dr. Ivor Blumenthal, through the film and publication bill. We know how it's going to affect us going forward. So if you're ready, I hand over to you. I think we lost our Jedi Master.
Sorry, I was saying very funny. I was so overtaken by your characterization of me as your Jedi Master, or one of your Jedi Masters. Okay, so let's get going, guys. The online and internet debate, the film and the publications bill, sometimes called the Internet Censorship Bill. This is not going to be a long discussion. It's really about simply being aware and keeping our eyes open about in terms of what's going on in Parliament. Sharon, I think I'm right when I say you've already distributed the pack of documents that I sent you, which really is about the contents of the Film and Publications Act and why something so seemingly separate from our lives in the contact center sector should be concerning us, or at least we should be aware of. And I quote here specifically the comments of the Democratic Alliance that are peppered throughout a lot of those documents, where they're actually saying that this is an attempt through the Film and Publications Act to get ICASA to police the internet and therefore to police anything of a digital content in this country. In fact, it was specifically stated by the DA that that's the interpretation of this act, by the Right to Know campaign equally, that this is the interpretation of the act. Now, you might ask, how does that affect us in the contact center sector? Well, it affects us because, number one, we rely on information which is digital and on the internet as well, in terms of our interactions very often with our clients. And importantly, in terms of making that relying on that content, one immediately then becomes subject to coverage by the Internet Censorship Bill. And importantly, we also provide information both in terms of over the telephone as well as digitally, either by way of email or by way of Internet Insight in one way or another. And in so doing, we are squarely playing within the context of the Internet Censorship Bill. So it actually starts reverberating in terms of its consequence, I think, for everybody out there. And it's for that reason that we need to be cautious and we need to take care of how we are taking responsibility for the quality and for the veracity, for the fairness and for the accuracy of content. Can I just ask at this stage before we go any further, is there anybody online who might possibly have already within their companies established a regulatory kind of a policy dealing with these issues? Is there anybody online who might have something to say in that regard? Sharon, from the perspective of the CCMG, has anything gone out before about this in an attempt to come to grips with what is or isn't applicable to the contact center sector?
Ivan, no. Other than the invitation that we sent out with all the documents attached, the conversations, and I must say the questions from people, and guys, it's probably all of you that are here on this call, have been pretty oblivious and I think a bit naive, because we didn't note how it could affect us. So I think it was slightly ignored. But this is what skills development is all about, our Jedi
All right.
Master.
All right, so moving on. So essentially, ladies and gentlemen, the objectives of the Act are this: to govern the Internet by governing what is referred to specifically as user-generated content. So to govern the Internet by governing user-generated content, to amend the Film and Publications Act of 96 by adapting it to technological advances, and very specifically in the debates that have gone on in Parliament, there's no question that in terms of what technological advances are defined as, the contact center mechanism is included in that discussion. The Independent Communications Authority, which is ICASA, will not issue licenses or renewals without confirmation from the Film and Publications Board of full compliance with its legislation. Now, that's a very broad term. It ordinarily would be relating to radio stations, television stations, to internet service providers. But there's no question that down the line, ICASA sees the contact center environment as an opportunity to include within the scope of their regulation. I know this because the debates have taken place over the last 5 years within the ICASA environment and also within Parliament. And the notion that because the contact center environment straddles the digital space and the personal space, particularly via Telkom, but also now via the various ISPs, all of those, Telkom, the ISPs, etc., all fall under the ambit of ICASA, and we just need to be wary of it. When I later on suggest the kind of action we can take, I've been remiss in talking about MOUs with the Film and Publications Board, etc., but I must probably need to add to that an MOU specifically between the Employer Association for the Contact Center sector and ICASA itself to look for an opportunity to self-govern so that we aren't caught by any surprises. Gavin Davis of the Democratic Alliance has said this, and he's been quite prolific in the input he's given and he's the Shadow Minister for Communications. So it's understandable then that he's the DA person who's spoken out the most. But he says the Film and Publications Board has said it wanted all internet material to be classified in South Africa, according to a government gazette released in March 2015, which outlined contents of the proposed online regulation policy. All online material will need to be classified in much the same way as films are currently classified. So the reality is what started off as an attempt by government to control pornography, to control access to information for children who are underage, to control the prolific spread of all of illicit stuff over the internet. So what started off as a noble cause to want to do that has become the realization that until you can control the agents of the internet, be they the ISPs, be they the publishers, be they the contact center environments that depend and on-sell information which is digitally housed, then until you can control those businesses, you cannot control the internet. So it's become very quickly a relationship between the Film and Publications Board together with ICASA that says we've got to do a lot more than just come out with regulations about the internet, because there is no address for the internet in South Africa, and therefore there is no control over content. There is an address for the owners of the website, the businesses that are depending on the digital content, the businesses that are on selling the digital content. And that's why the strategy is to get to those businesses rather than necessarily just the content itself. Please feel free, guys, to ask questions as and when you want to. So the policy appears to apply to any person who uploads online content, be it via Facebook, Instagram, a blog, or any other online platform. And it opens the door for the state to impinge on citizens' constitutional rights to freedom of expression and to impart information. Now, what's very exciting, I think, rather than just interesting, is that the Film and Publications Board and ICASA are regularly ready to reach compromises as long as they know that there is going to be a sense of self-governance. So, for example, the policy's reach was expected to impact on online publishers by forcing them to apply to the board to have their content classified. However, it was reported last month that a key compromise was made in this regard, as members of the Press Council are exempt from the policy. Now, that's not quite true. They're not exempt from the policy. Members of the Press Council will have their online content governed by the Press Code and not the online regulations policy. So the code in the Press Council has been mapped against what is being proposed as an online regulation policy, and the statement has been made that the Press Council's code covers what the concerns are in the online regulation policy. Members of the Press Council are subject to the authority of the Press Council, and therefore both ICASA and the Film and Publications Board are comfortable that the Press Council will take care of their members and be accountable to ICASA and the Film and Publications Board and the Ministry of Communication for what their members do. So Andrew Allison, who's head of regulatory affairs at the Interactive Advertising Bureau, says this: "We have had positive confirmation from the Film and Publications Board CEO that the current exemption that applies to the press will be extended to general press content, irrespective of the medium in which it was published." Now, that's very good news for the Employer Association for the Contact Center sector, because it says similarly, we can seek a similar, not exemption, because it's not an exemption, but a similar relationship with the Film and Publications Board, with the Department of Communications, and with ICASA that the IAB has followed, and specifically that the Press Council has entered into with those organizations. Any questions or comments at this stage? Got a very quiet group today, Sharon.
Yeah, Ivor, I think it's one of those again. It's confusing, but there is actually better news in this session than what there has been in previous ones.
Sharon, is the link available to have this for the download after the event? It seems like something that I know certainly I was unaware of, and as I house the digital section of our contact centre, if I'm unaware, I'm assuming all of my colleagues are too.
Yes, what we do is after the event, I will now take Ivor's slides and add it to the Employers Association section on the CCMG website. So all you need to do is go there, and we would have uploaded Ivor's slides. We already have all the documentation loaded.
And Sharon, am I right in saying this actual presentation is also uploaded as a link?
Yes, it is. We're recording it, and as soon as I get it onto YouTube, it goes onto the website as well.
Fantastic. So, Philip, hopefully that answers your question. Right, moving on. Okay, so now what are the lessons to learn from the process going forward? Because I don't want to take you through clause by clause of the proposed bill. That's unnecessary. It really has everything to do with protecting children, protecting the vulnerable in our community, protecting the community. And I'm sure that many of you would have been watching yesterday's interrogation of Mark Zuckerberg by the European Parliament, or let's say non-interrogation if you saw it my way, because they asked the questions and he didn't answer the questions. But the reality is that that's what this is about. It's about protecting civil liberties and civil rights, and particularly the vulnerable in society, to the extent that we can be confident with what we read digitally and how that digital information is used. So the lessons to learn. Well, there's no question that both ICASA, the Department of Communications, and the Film and Publications Board are very open to industries coming along and saying, look, we play in the digital space, but we do not want to be subject to some arbitrary set of regulations by an organization which was designed first and foremost as the country's censorship organization that really is not a digital player themselves. We are a digital player. We represent a component of the digital player, even in terms of the downstream customer role of using that digital information. And as such, we want an MOU, a memorandum of understanding between the Employer Association for the Contact Center sector and ICASA, the Department of Communications, and the Film and Publications Board, that says you recognize our right to self-govern our members rather than be subject to the Film and Publications Control Authority. So we want an agreement with the Film and Publications Board that the Employer Association for the Contact Center will govern, regulate, and ensure compliance amongst our members sufficient to satisfy their requirements. We want Shirley to set standards for responsible communication in the contact center environment. Now, in exactly the same way that digital practitioners are held to responsible marketing guidelines, which are governed by the Advertising Standards Authority on behalf of the Media and Communication Charter Council. So they've got that now in place in their charter, in their charter for their sector. In fact, their charter has replaced the generic BBBE codes for their sector. They've already got that in place. I'm suggesting that in the contact center environment, we need exactly the same thing in place for contact center businesses, where we set the standards for responsible communication. We call it responsible communication. And importantly, if we eventually get to the state of having our contact center charter in place, whereas in the in the media and communication sector, which now has its own charter, whereas in that charter, there is a sixth BBBE element that gets you scorecard points called responsible marketing, it is not impossible to envisage that we would be able to have a sixth element for our scorecard in contact center environments, which is called responsible communication, where companies which just do what we agree should be done in terms of adherence to the standards we establish for ourselves will automatically earn the kind of compliance points in BBBE that differentiate our scorecard from that of the generic scorecard. That's not what our strategy is at the moment, but it is conceivably the same route as the MAC charter code that we could follow eventually. So self-governance and regulation, an MOU or a set of MOUs setting standards for responsible communication, and then looking at the quality of practitioners to self-govern against our own communication standards. The quality of our practitioners, essentially your members, Sharon, in the professional body, to self-govern against our own communication standards that I'm suggesting need to be established by the Employer Association for the Contact Center sector. And that's, by the way, why I started off by calling this the Confederation, because it would be a confederation between the Employer Association and the professional body to work together for this purpose. Compliance testing for all practitioners. So we need to see a situation where, irrespective of what your designation is, Sharon, from the professional body, there is an element of that designation that talks to compliance testing of the standards for responsible communication, which eventually are developed by the Employer Association. So we can truly say we're closing the loop, and there is no need for external interference from the Film and Publication Board, from the Department of Communication, or from ICASA in the way our members do their business. Well, that didn't sound right, the way our members do their business, but you know what I'm talking about. So compliance testing for all practitioners on the one hand, compliance certification, which means a compliance and risk management officer designation for someone already in the workplace, and I'll explain this a little further down the line. Any questions or comments on the process going forward as we're beginning to articulate it? Okay, moving on. So the compact. What is the compact? Well, the Employer Association for the Contact Center sector becomes responsible for ensuring an appropriate standard is established between all stakeholders for communication using online tools and references, confirmations, and undertakings. So companies which use online tools, which use online references, which make online or digital confirmations, and which undertake certain things and confirm them online, need to be the subject of the standard or standards that we eventually agree should apply to members of the Employer Association. The Employer Association for the Contact Center sector enters into an MOU with the professional body for the contact center sector for the professional body to govern the activities of the individuals who work in the member companies of the employer association. So the employer association doesn't govern the employees of its member businesses. It governs the employers and the trading interests of its members. Whereas the professional body governs the people who work in those companies and is the responsible and accountable party responsible for the people who work in those companies. And that's why an agreement to work together within a confederation is so urgently required, I believe, between the employer association and the professional body. This standard, the communication standard, is jointly communicated to all member companies and individual practitioners through, respectively, the employer association and the professional body. The communication standard is published in a national newspaper once a year as an employer association pledge to the public on behalf of all corporate members of the employer association and the professional body. I would imagine it wouldn't be an employer association pledge, it would be a Confederation for the Contact Center sector pledge on behalf of the employer association and the professional body to the public at large. And the communication standard is offered as an elective and a CPD a continuous professional development training module for all employees in all member companies. All designated members of the professional body must sign a communications pledge, as must all corporate members. Member companies employing over 50 people must assign one manager to become the compliance officer. Members employing less than 50 people must assign compliance functions to a manager or more than one manager who would serve as a contact person for the company on compliance and participate in annual continuous professional development offered by the professional body on compliance. And within 12 months of signing the pledge, the member company must ensure that the compliance officer has been fully designated as such by the professional body and is in good standing with the professional body at all times. Compliance officers are expected to complete certificates of compliance and upload those certificates of compliance to their personal vaults in terms of their professional body membership so that they can be moderated and the compliance officers can retain their professional designations. So I've said a lot here, and it's a loop that I'm describing. But certainly I would hope that you've got questions and possibly comments before I continue.
From my point of view, it definitely starts forming as you say, the confederation between the individuals in the companies and the employers of those individuals. And I think by having more of these, it is just becoming clearer how closely they work together but yet apart. And I know, as for my email to you, we have a few things to unpack on the 4th of June, but that is definitely clear as to how those are going to work. And then obviously the different compacts and the different conditions of participating, all of this will fall under that.
So Yogesh says, in assuming that these suggestions are a guide that you suggested that will be acceptable to the ultimate governing body of ICASA. Yogesh, thank you for that. You're quite correct. Although I must say this to you, we would not be going to ICASA cap in hand and saying, please rubber stamp what we're doing. We'd be going to ICASA and saying, look, we're taking care of communication as a standard around the film and publications concerns anyway, but we'd like to enter into an agreement with you that you recognize that a contact center business is first and foremost responsible to its employer association if it's a member of the employer association. If it's not, then we would recommend that you deal with that contact center business as ICASA. But if it is, we would want to deal with that member ourselves and resolve issues, even if it means coming back to ICASA and saying this is an unresolvable issue, and therefore we need you to step in as the ultimate arbiter. but it's basically the same relationship you would find in the labor relations environment between a bargaining council and a CCMA. If a company falls within an employer association that's a member of a bargaining council, the bargaining council takes care of the issue. So an employee can't take that employer to the CCMA. It has to go to the bargaining council, where the bargaining council tries to resolve the issue. If it doesn't resolve the issue, the bargaining council can then allow the employee to go straight to the labor court. But the CCMA is cut out of that loop. It's exactly the same principle in this relationship, that we want first and foremost to cut ICASA out of the loop because we have a self-governing confederation, and only in the absence of the confederation being able to do its business would ICASA have to step in as a mediator possibly and as an arbitrator eventually. So Yogesh, in response to your question, we don't need to implement this on the basis of a plan to get ICASA to agree. We will, Sharon, my suggestion is we want to approach ICASA straight away. We want to approach the Film and Publication Board straight away and begin the engagements with them. But my suggestion is that on a parallel basis, we want to set up the working committee to establish our communication standard, to make sure there's a procedural mechanism for that standard in place that can be applied by the employer association, and simply then to implement the standard as per these clauses, Yogesh. So my answer to you is I would imagine if we did this as a critical project, it could be in place by the end of August at the very latest, let's say September at the very latest. And in other words, we could have a publication in a national newspaper saying that the Employer Association holds its members accountable for having signed the compact, the following components of which constitute the communication policy of the Contact Center Confederation, and therefore members of the public know that they have recourse against those contact center businesses through the confederation and through the respective bodies. If it's a company, through the employer association. If it's an individual, it's through the professional body. Have recourse should they be aggrieved in one way or another in terms of the communications policy, in terms of how digital information has been used. Obviously subject to us training up sufficient mediators and arbitrators from amongst you guys, the member companies, who could hear these cases as and when they are raised. But that way we have an agreement with Hello Peter, we have an agreement with the Consumer Council and the Consumer Court, that all matters to do with the contact center sector in terms of communications, and particularly this standard policy we have established should be referred through to the Confederation rather than those organizations themselves trying to deal with those matters. So, Yogesh, I hope that answers your question. Anybody else want to ask or make a comment? Sharon, I hope I haven't put words into your mouth here.
No, Ivor. Well, yes, you have. So my next thing is to say to our now 13 participants on this call, if you're really keen about this and you believe in this, we will be putting together the subcommittee, and we invite you to just reach out. Let me know that you want to be part and parcel of this, and more hands, light work. Let's get this going.
Good. Fantastic. Thank you. All right. So this is very important, and I hope this is clear. We are saying that everybody who gets designated by our professional body, we would like to have a component of competency, understanding and application around our standards for communication, on the one hand. On the other hand, we're saying that in smaller companies that have less than 50 people or 50 seats, we want to see a manager who ordinarily is responsible for a whole series of activities also become responsible for compliance within that business, because someone, or even within each division, a individual within each division has to be responsible for compliance, has to become responsible for compliance. In your larger companies, and that's classified as 50 or more employees, we would want to see a compliance officer, someone who very well might share a job, but as well is the compliance officer and therefore the single accountable person within that organization, and therefore registered, designated with a professional body as a compliance officer designation or a compliance designation, depending on what we call it. Because then we're able to say to ICASA and the Film and Publications Board, not only do we have a standard, but we can tell you who, within the critical mass size of business of our members, we can tell you who the compliance officers are, so that you in your own right as ICASA and the Film and Publications Board can offer CPD workshops and seminars to those individuals, and we'll do that through our professional body as much as we're doing it ourselves. And that is really self-governance. That's closing the loop on self-governance. What's interesting, though, is where we have compliance officers, the suggestion is we go one stage further, and that those compliance officers have to draw down certificates of compliance from the professional body, complete them, and upload them into their personal vault so that they can be moderated on an annual basis. Because it affects two things. It affects the designation of the individual themselves doing that compliance testing, and it helps them to keep their designation when they need to re-register. But importantly as well, it talks to the grading system of the company itself. And remember, the Employer Association will grade that company. It talks to the grading system of the company itself that it is in good standing as far as compliance testing and compliance certification is concerned, because it has one or more dedicated people doing this work. And therefore, it can stand up and say responsible communication is what we're about as a company. And we, as the Employer Association, can say to the public at large, these are the graded businesses. These are the excellent businesses in the sector that you should be doing business with, because they know what they're doing, they're compliant, they're customer-centric, they're globally ready, and the people who work for them are professional. Our public compact. Now it's important, so I'm going to emphasize this point. Our public compact says the public undertaking by the Employer Association and the professional body for the contact center sector, the Contact Center Confederation. We, the members of the Contact Center Confederation, representing the companies which operate in this sector and the individuals who are held accountable as professional practitioners in this sector, hereby commit to the public that all Employer Association member companies employing professional body designated practitioners, which companies are graded by the Employer Association for compliance, professionalism, global readiness, and customer centricism, hereby commit, number one, that we will self-regulate and ensure that the quality of all information provided telephonically or digitally on a personal basis or published for confirmation has all been properly and professionally screened, qualified, and authorized as proper, appropriate, verifiable, and dependable in terms of the communication standards annually reviewed and published under the auspices of the Contact Center Confederation. And we need to just see that what that does then is it implements self-governance. It says it's not ICASA's policies. It's not the Film and Publications Board's policies. It's us. Yes, quality assured by ICASA, quality assured by the Film and Publications Board, but it's us. We are self-governing. Number two, that all practitioners working in the sector have been properly trained and designated as competent to perform their functions in terms of the applicable standards of communication, and that compliance testing and certification in terms of these standards is common practice amongst all corporate members of the Employer Association and individual members of the professional body. That members of the public are free to lay a charge of non-compliance against any corporate member of the Employer Association or any individual designated by the professional body in terms of these standards, which charge or charges will be fully investigated and pursued within the Contact Center Confederation. Now, I know that says a lot, but ultimately that's what we want to say to the public at large. And so I need to ask you for your thoughts and for your comments and for your input, ladies and gentlemen. Please feel free just to unmute your microphone and just to talk.
Just to let them all start thinking about their questions. I think, ladies and gents, you know, how proud can somebody not be working in an environment that is this organized and that has taken responsibility for the people, the companies, and the public? You know, if this is started now, it's starting now, but if it is shared far and wide, don't you think we're going to have a different attitude with the people that we employ that actually work in this industry, instead of just Oh, all I'm doing is taking calls. They are responsible for a little more, and they get a bigger role to play.
The silence is deafening, guys. I hope you're all on the line and can hear us.
Well, we know Yogesh is there because he keeps sending us messages. Okay, Bernice is typing something. Gee, you are alive. We're all here.
All right. Okay. So, guys, look, we don't have to belabor the point, but this is very certainly the direction in which we're headed. I hope you agree that it's a constructive direction that we're headed in. Any rules, any application of whatever standards or policies we come up with is to be determined completely by you and your representatives in our subcommittees, and the policies that we eventually implement will be policies that you've agreed you're comfortable with. So this is not a case of external parties. This is a case of us collectively as the contact center sector agreeing on what's in our best interest, so that the employer association, together with a professional body, is able to approach ICASA, is able to approach the Film and Publications Board, and is able to say, we want to enter into an agreement with you that we take responsibility for our members as responsible communicators, and that you hold us accountable for our corporate members and for individuals who are professionally designated by us as a professional body. And we will then be your partner in this process. And that's what's being proposed here, but I hope that you collectively are in agreement that it certainly might be the best thing in our industry's interest. And that, in fact, is the route that we're looking to go and the route that we're looking to follow. Please feel free to listen to this conversation again when you get the link from Sharon, to look at the documents, but importantly to look at this presentation and to look at it in terms of what we're proposing, and come back to us in writing. Speak to other people in your company, speak to other companies you're in a network in. That's the only way we get this message across in terms of what it is we're trying to do before we go public, before we go external of the contact center sector, because we don't want to pretend to have an authority or a mandate from our members that we don't have at the end of the day. But what we want to do is give you the pride of purpose of being associated with a sector that is strongly and professionally governed through a confederation of this nature. So if there are no further questions, I want to thank you for listening and for participating. Sharon, I want to thank you for creating the platform for this kind of discussion to be taking place in.
And thank you, Ivor, to you for being part of this. I think, just as a note, if you are wanting to participate in the subcommittee, drop me an email. A reminder that the last conversation we had was around BBBEE, and those submissions have to be in next week. So we are going to start wrapping them up. So you do still have a few days to send us your feedback so that we can just make sure it is all in the feedback that we are presenting to them.
And Sharon, can I just say that the next information session, which will most probably be in about 4 weeks' time, will be an information session which is designed around the procurement standards that procurement officers in the contact center companies should be focusing on for the various industries. We're going to be talking about the need to establish procurement standards per industry almost. So if you're dealing with media and communication as an industry, what are the procurement standards in terms of the MAC Charter? If you're dealing with an industry in the construction sector, what are the procurement standards in the construction sector? And if you're dealing with an industry that doesn't fall into a charter code, excuse me, what are the procurement standards that should generically apply for exempt qualified small and large companies? So that will be the discussion that takes place in about 4 weeks' time on this information sharing forum.
I thank you very much. And guys, enjoy your day. Have a good one.
Thanks, guys.